Okay, now to kick off the formal part of our program, we are going to have, I love this, warm your hands. We call it a fireside chat. We love this, but this is going to be a great interactive discussion. And I'd like to welcome up Dr. Frank Douglas and Jackie Raia for a conversation titled Discussing Elephants in the Room Without Burning the Room Down.
Dr. Frank Douglas, Ph.D., MD. So we have the task of setting the stage for today.
Yes.
So right off the bat, you have so many letters behind your name. I have none. So we're on equal playing field. We okay with Frank and Jackie?
I'm okay with that.
All right. Yeah, because, in a lot of situations, people in the room, you want to have conversations because they're big elephants in the room. So to be on the most equal playing field is really important. Okay. So thank you, Frank. All right.
You're welcome, Jackie.
So you see that big red clock back there? We have very limited time. So if it's okay, I'm going to dive right into the questions with you, all right?
Okay.
All right. So you shared with me when we had a pre-planning call this matrix that you have. Equity plus inclusion plus engagement. What does that mean?
What it simply means, and in fact, our chairperson and president made a comment that I thought was really right on target. Values, great values, bring great RO1. And as I look, and I think the name of this summit is really appropriate, Elephants and Shifting Sand. And we have a big elephant in the room right now, and that is, what do we do about diversity? But a number of years ago, I began to look at this issue and began to think that in a real sense, what we need to be looking at is what Gallup showed us, namely that companies that are in the top quartile with respect to engaged employees do better, have 24% greater productivity, profitability compared with those in the bottom quartile. So that individual engagement or employee engagement is important. Now, in any organization, how do we get to engaged or motivated employees? It's equity and inclusion. So for us in Safe Haven Dialogues, we talk about equity and inclusion and individual engagement. Not that diversity is not important. We had to start that discussion there. But the last comment I'll make with respect to that, and this is why I like this title of Shifting Sands, because we are on shifting sands. Where is the solid ground? The solid ground is actually the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths as self-evident, that all men, that's the diversity, are created equal, that's the equity, and are endowed by their Creator with unalienable gifts, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Endowed, unalienable life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. That's the inclusion. So if you look at the Declaration of Independence, there you have it, DEI. So I don't get involved in a lot of discussions with the moral side of it, the social side of it. All of those things are important and get to the great values. That's how they get expressed. The inclusion of the values, they get expressed. But just deal with the reality. Whether it is a nonprofit or a for-profit, it's about doing better. It's about profitability. It's about productivity. It's about engaged individuals, and we get there through equity and inclusion.
Thank you so much, Frank. So, you brought up the name of your company, Safe Haven, and I use that term a lot as well. Safe spaces, you name it, where you can be comfortable, where you can be your most authentic self, where you can celebrate yourself, right? So you use an acronym, again, in a prior conversation, VIP. And how does that acronym and holding oneself accountable play into what you preach and practice, obviously?
What we do at Safe Haven Dialogues, we focus on the individual. And if there's an aggrieved individual, what we have noticed is that often that individual is not heard. And we do a great job in our DEI efforts with respect to the environment, sensitivity with respect to microaggressions, etc. But many times the individual is not heard. So we put together our panel, whom we call VIP. And in fact, my colleague who created that term, my namesake, Frank, is here. He's one of our VIPs, and he actually created that term for us, which means victors in overcoming injustice in their professions, VIP, victors in justice professions. And what we basically do is if someone has a problem, we invite them to come and discuss with us, to present their case in a particular manner where they focus on the desired outcome, they focus on the situation they're in, they focus on the environment and what they think the problem is. And we do this in bullet form, so they get an opportunity to step back a little bit from the emotion. And the VIPs listen to this and then look at two things, namely, what are the issues around equity that's facing that individual? What are the issues around inclusion that are facing that individual? And by doing that, they are beginning to walk in the shoes of the individual. And so this is the importance of the VIP. The individual recognizes these are individuals who have walked in their shoes. They're going through a process in which they're presently walking in their shoes. And then from that discussion, we begin to ask ourselves the question, is there a better problem to solve in order to get to the desired outcome? So the role of the VIP is very important, whether it is the special panel or in companies. If you have your managers take the role of the VIP, then those managers really get to walk in the shoes of the aggrieved individual. And that individual then recognizes that they're being heard, and you will now have set up a situation where you can have the dialogue, and we talk about the conversation, the dialogue, you can have a more productive dialogue. And we have clear criteria about what's a better problem to solve, but the one I will mention is that a better problem to solve, it's a problem, the solution to which benefits not only the aggrieved, but others in the work unit. That's a better problem to solve.
So, Frank, and I think there are others in the room who might agree, that elephant that's in the room is that, oh, I could never admit to what I'm feeling. My job might be at risk. My reputation might be at risk. I might seem weak, vulnerable, all those things. How do you get someone to hold themselves accountable to really state the problem? That why are they aggrieved? And that's a pretty heavy word, aggrieved. How do you get people to a point where they're comfortable saying, all right, this is what's really bothering me, and here's how I think we can solve it? What do you think?
I think in a real sense we have to recognize that in an organization we have two levels or two areas of responsibility for that question. The equity side of it is really the responsibility of the leaders. The leaders have got to set the tone and to set the guardrails which tell us this is the way we play. This is the way we ensure that there's fairness. So the leaders have got to do that. And then at the level of the work unit, the frontline supervisors and co-workers have got to instill the behaviors that bring inclusion, that make me feel I belong, that value, again, that word, that values my participation, etc. So you have to have a reinforcement of equity and inclusion for an individual to feel safe. And one of the things which we've done is we've created what we call an equity inclusion matrix. And the typical, we're NJBIA, so we do this all the time, the 2x2 matrix. And if you plot equity versus inclusion, you can see very simply if equity is high, inclusion is high, top right-hand corner, we call it a psychologically safe environment. If equity is low, inclusion is low, that's a psychologically toxic environment. And then you've got two unsafe, and you can describe that. And so you can, taking someone through this process, identify where they are in this matrix. So the simple answer to your question is that if indeed equity and inclusion are being fostered to reinforce each other, and you use the visual picture, and that then begins to encourage individuals who are aggrieved, and I like to use that word, who are aggrieved to come forward and have the discussion. And sometimes, you have to set it up because trust is earned. We all know that. And so organizations have got to earn that trust. You can't just simply say, we're going to do this. So that takes time. But if you set it up so that you begin to get a number of wins, then the trust begins to grow.
So thank you for that answer, Frank. But while you were speaking, the elephant just ate a lot of peanuts and got heavier. Because as we know, people don't leave jobs, they leave bad managers.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And, I personally have experienced that on too many occasions. What happens when that manager is the one who is aggrieving you, if that's the word, who is the problem? That the message is not getting to them that, you're really causing a problem for me. You're not making me feel like I belong. You're not making me feel like I'm valued. I've told you this before. What do you do?
Well, this is why we really focus on the individual, because the real intent by going through this process is to empower that individual to have that dialogue with the manager. And it becomes easier to have the dialogue with the manager because we have to realize that some managers are just inept at this. I mean, it's a simple fact. Because they're manager doesn't mean they're good people managers. They're great at managing widgets, but they may not be good people managers. Just a reality. And, most organizations recognize that. And so we have all sorts of programs we take some managers through, but, that's the way it is. So we have to realize that. But it becomes easier for a manager if the dialogue is not so much about what you're doing to me, it makes me aggrieved, but, this is getting in the way of my becoming an engaged employee, my becoming very motivated. And not only there are others who probably have the same. Is there a way that we could improve the situation so that I can become more engaged, more motivated? That dialogue becomes a little bit easier for a manager to deal with than the other dialogue, which says, when you do X, Y, Z, this is how it makes me feel. And then that manager, is sitting there saying, you just don't know how it makes me feel when you tell me that. Particularly if it's a manager who means well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What a great point. I think a good manager, a great manager, the manager that I like to have is one that can admit, I don't know everything. And I particularly don't know everything about you, Frank. So if I'm doing something that's bothering you, to be brave enough to say, that's really bothering me, and then have that dialogue, because there's always room to grow, to learn. So always, it is our responsibility as human beings, fellow human beings, peers and colleagues, to not only learn, but to teach, right, about ourselves. So walking in someone else's shoes, answer this for me, if you will. What does empathy mean to you? And how do we identify it? How do we build it? And how do we exercise it?
That's probably the most difficult question, because you can't hold people and say, be empathetic. I'll tell you a story. This happened with someone whom I know extremely well, I think highly of, who's a white female colleague of mine. And we were chatting, and she said to me, I don't understand why black men run when the police want them to stop, and they end up getting killed. And I said, let me tell you a story that happened to me. And so I told her the story of my coming back late one night from dinner, lived in a gated community, and there were three cop cars, I should say, which is 6 cops, around where I was supposed to park. I pulled in, they accosted me, told me come out of the car, etc. It was a condo unit. I looked up, I couldn't see anybody at the windows. And that feeling of fear and flight came in me. And were it not for the fact that I was 70 years of age and knew that I couldn't run any place, I might have run. Okay? But I was quite fearful, particularly since I couldn't see anyone who would have witnessed it. Okay? And my friend said to me, well, but the end of the story was they discovered after checking the car that I was not in an accident, as I told them, etc. She said to me, well, it was just probably an accident. And it struck me that here is a good friend of mine who knew me for many years, who could not walk in my shoes, didn't have the empathy to understand what a 70-year-old man was experiencing at that moment. And I concluded, because I know her very well, it's not that good people do nothing, is that often good people feel nothing. And so this question about empathy is a very difficult one. And I think the only way I know how you build empathy, it's something that, let me put it this way. In fact, I was asked a similar question very recently. And I made the observation, because the way the question was asked, you know, my daughters, they went to school with white kids. We grew up in a white neighborhood. And they have friends who are black and white. They're godparents, etc. And then their friends, they're just people. And they share the pains that they each have in their marriage and their being mothers, etc. So it takes a while. But what it is that they grew up walking in each other's shoes. They lived in the same place. They played the same. They had the same after-school programs. So as much as we can, to create situations where people can really walk in the shoes of the other, that's where you begin to build empathy. But it takes time. Mm-hmm. It takes time. And so we, and I point to myself, you know, who might be aggrieved, but, you know, and one of the reasons I talk about discrimination and not about systemic racism is that, you know, discrimination occurs. Gender, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation. Anytime you have a situation where there's one group that has power and doesn't remember that we're all created equal, and they start exercising that power to the detriment of the other, there's discrimination. Okay, so this empathy takes time, and we have to remember that. But the organization, when we're in organizations, have got to create the situation where equity and inclusion can reinforce each other.
Frank, again, unbelievably powerful words. Empathy is something that if you are not willing to be vulnerable like you were with your colleague, who you've known for quite a number of years, to teach her, walk in my shoes for a second. And I experienced the same thing with girlfriends that I've known since 4th grade, with all of the anti-Asian hate And I said to them, I have never felt so vulnerable and so unsafe as I have in the last couple of years.
Couple years, yeah.
They looked at me and they're like, what? But you're not them. No, I am. I am. And here's what we face every day, right? And I went out on a limb, got emotional with them. So now they're walking in my shoes. But if I wasn't willing to share that with them, there's no way that they would be able to feel that, right? And I'm okay with that. I'm okay being vulnerable. So closing remark on my end, and we're out of time, but all I want to say is thank you for being vulnerable with not only this group, with me, but with your colleagues. This, everyone, is how we're going to get to the next step. This is how we address the elephant in the room on the shifting
Thank
sand.
you.
So thank you.